The card reader's harsh beep echoed through the nearly empty grocery store like a judgment, and Natasha Williams felt her 4-year-old's world crumble in her arms. Until a stranger's quiet voice changed everything. "I've got this. Welcome back, my beautiful friends. I am so glad to have you here today. And before we continue, I want to know, where are you watching from today? Drop the name of your city in the comments below. And if you are ready to enjoy this story to the end, don't forget to click subscribe, like and share it with someone you love. Now let's really get into the story. The fluorescent lights of Metro Grocery buzzed like angry wasps overhead as Natasha Williams shifted her sleeping daughter to her left hip, her right hand fumbling through her worn purse for the 10th time. 11:47 p.m. The store would close in 13 minutes, and Maya had fallen asleep 20 minutes ago, her tiny fist still clutching the small box of animal crackers she'd begged for. "Mama tired?" Maya had whispered earlier, her big brown eyes reflecting the harsh store lighting. "Just a little, baby. Just a little." But tired didn't cover it. Tired was when you worked a double shift at the diner and still had energy to read bedtime stories. This was something deeper, a bone-deep exhaustion that came from working 2 jobs, taking night classes, and still watching your bank account hover dangerously close to empty. This was the kind of tired that made you shop at 11:47 p.m. because it was the only time that existed between your shift at Morrison's Diner and your morning classes at community college. Natasha approached the checkout counter with 17 items in her basket. Exactly 17, because she'd counted twice. Milk, bread, peanut butter, the animal crackers Maya wanted, and 13 other carefully calculated necessities. The cashier, a teenager with blue-streaked hair and kind eyes, offered a sympathetic smile as she scanned each item. "Long day?" the girl asked softly, clearly recognizing the universal look of a parent at the end of their rope. "Every day," Natasha replied, attempting a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The total flashed on the screen, $47.83. Natasha had calculated $46.50 in her head, but she'd forgotten about tax on the shampoo. Her chest tightened, but she pressed her debit card into the reader anyway, silently praying to whoever might be listening. "Please work. Please, please work. Beep, beep, beep. I'm sorry, ma'am. Your card's been declined. Do you have another form of payment?" 15 miles across town, Justine Cole stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, watching the city breathe below him. Even at nearly midnight, Manhattan never truly slept, just like him. He'd been awake since 4 a.m., reviewing acquisition reports for a tech startup in Seattle, negotiating a merger via video call with executives in Tokyo, and preparing for tomorrow's board meeting where they'd discuss the quarterly numbers that would make or break smaller companies. Numbers. Everything in Justine's world came down to numbers. Profit margins, stock prices, market projections. Clean, predictable, controllable. Unlike people. His reflection stared back at him from the glass. A man of 34 who looked older in the eyes, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Dark skin, sharp jawline, and the kind of presence that made boardrooms go quiet when he entered. But tonight, something felt different. Hollow. His phone buzzed. Another email from his assistant about tomorrow's schedule. Another reminder of the charity gala next week, where he'd need to smile and write checks and pretend that writing checks was the same thing as caring. Justine had learned long ago that caring was a luxury he couldn't afford. Not when his father had built Cole Industries on the principle that weakness was worse than failure. Not when showing emotion was seen as a liability in a world where every move was scrutinized by shareholders and competitors alike. He loosened his tie, finally admitting what his body had been telling him for hours. He needed food, and the expensive restaurant downstairs had closed an hour ago. There was a grocery store a few blocks away that stayed open late. He could grab something simple, maybe some of those ready-made sandwiches that tasted like cardboard but required no thought. 20 minutes later, Justine pushed through the doors of Metro Grocery, his presence immediately shifting the atmosphere of the nearly empty store. He wasn't trying to command attention. It just happened. The security guard straightened, the stock clerk glanced over twice, and even the teenager at the register seemed to stand a little taller. He was reaching for a prepackaged sandwich when he heard it, a sound that stopped him cold. A child's sleepy voice. Mama, why you crying? Justine froze at the sound of the child's voice, his hand still hovering over the sandwich display. Something in those innocent words, Mama, why you crying, cut through every wall he'd built around himself over 34 years of life. He turned toward the checkout counter, and what he saw there would replay in his mind for months to come. A young woman stood with her back partially to him, her shoulders trembling almost imperceptibly as she held a little girl who couldn't have been older than 4. The child's arms were wrapped around her mother's neck, and even from a distance, Justine could see the woman's free hand shaking as she stared at the card reader. Ma'am, the teenage cashier's voice was gentle, patient. Do you have cash or another card? I thought I had enough. I counted. The woman's voice was barely above a whisper, but Justine caught every word. There was something in her tone, not just embarrassment, but the kind of quiet devastation that came from being pushed beyond your breaking point. It's okay, the cashier said. This happens all the time. Maybe we can put some items back. Justine watched as the woman, he could see her profile now, the elegant curve of her cheekbone wet with a tear she was trying to hide from her daughter, began scanning the items in her basket with the desperate calculation of someone who had to choose between necessities. The crackers, she whispered, reaching for the small box her daughter had been clutching. We can put back the crackers. No, Mama. The little girl's voice rose in panic. You promised. I know, baby. I know I did, but Mama made a mistake. But you promised. The word hit Justine like a physical blow. In his world, promises were contracts, negotiations, strategic commitments. But this child's broken trust over a $2 box of animal crackers carried more weight than any merger agreement he'd ever signed. The woman closed her eyes for a moment, gathering herself. When she opened them, Justine saw something he recognized. The look of someone who had learned to carry impossible weight without breaking, at least not where anyone could see. Okay, she said to the cashier. Put back the shampoo, the crackers, and... Her voice caught. And the milk. But Mama, I'm thirsty, the little girl whimpered. I know, sweetheart. We have juice boxes at home. Justine knew she was lying. Something in her posture, the way her fingers gripped her daughter, just a little tighter, told him there probably weren't juice boxes at home. There probably wasn't much of anything at home. He'd been poor once, briefly, when he was 7 and his mother left his father for 3 months. He remembered the taste of watered-down cereal, the way his stomach felt hollow and angry. But that had lasted 12 weeks. This woman looked like she'd been fighting this battle for years. Without conscious thought, Justine stepped forward. Excuse me. 3 heads turned toward him. The cashier, the woman, and the little girl who peeked at him from behind her mother's shoulder. The woman's eyes widened slightly when she saw him, and he realized what he must look like. A man in a $3,000 suit shopping at midnight, everything about him screaming money and power. I've got this, he said simply, pulling out his black credit card. The woman stepped back as if he'd struck her. What? No, I can't. It's already done, Justine said, handing his card to the cashier before the woman could protest further. He kept his voice low, calm, the same tone he used in boardrooms when he needed to convey absolute certainty. Ring up everything in her basket. Sir, I really can't accept, the woman began, but Justine held up a hand. Not charity, he said, meeting her eyes for the first time. They were brown, flecked with gold, and filled with a pride so fierce it took his breath away. Kindness. There's a difference. The little girl was staring at him with unabashed curiosity, her tear tracks dried but still visible on her cheeks. You're really tall, she announced. Despite everything, the tension, the woman's obvious mortification, his own confusion about why he was doing this, Justine almost smiled. Almost. You're really small, he replied, and the little girl giggled. Maya, her mother said sharply. Don't bother the man. She's not bothering me. Justine looked at the child, Maya, and felt something shift inside his chest. When was the last time someone had looked at him without calculation, without wondering what he wanted or what he could do for them? What's your favorite animal cracker? The lions, Maya said, her earlier distress forgotten. They're brave and strong like Mama. Justine's eyes moved back to the woman, Maya's mother. She was watching this exchange with the wariness of someone who'd learned that unexpected kindness usually came with strings attached. The card reader chimed its approval. Transaction complete. There, Justine said, accepting his card back from the cashier, who had watched the entire interaction with wide eyes. Everything stays in the basket. I don't even know your name, the woman said, her voice thick with emotions he couldn't quite read. Gratitude, yes, but also frustration, embarrassment, and something that might have been anger. Justine, he said. Justine Cole. She studied his face for a long moment, and he had the strangest feeling she was memorizing it. Natasha Williams. And this is Maya. Hi, Mr. Justine. Maya waved at him with the enthusiasm only a 4-year-old could muster. Just Justine, he corrected gently. Natasha was gathering her bags with sharp, efficient movements, clearly eager to leave. But at the door, she stopped and turned back. Thank you, she said, and the words seemed to cost her something. I'll find a way to pay you back. You don't owe me anything, Justine replied. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. Something had passed between them in those few minutes. Some invisible thread that connected his corporate world to her midnight grocery runs. He didn't understand it, couldn't quantify it in any spreadsheet or business model. All he knew was that watching Natasha Williams walk out of that store felt like watching something precious slip through his fingers. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Justine Cole wanted something that wasn't for sale. The elevator in Natasha's apartment building had been broken for 3 months, so she climbed 4 flights of stairs with Maya in her arms and 2 bags of groceries that felt heavier with each step. Not because of their weight, but because of what they represented. Charity. The word tasted bitter in her mouth, even though the man, Justine, had insisted it wasn't. She'd heard that before. Her ex-boyfriend Jeremy had called his controlling behavior protection. Her mother had called her criticism love. Words were cheap when they came from people who had everything. Mama, you're squeezing too tight, Maya mumbled against her shoulder. Sorry, baby. Natasha loosened her grip and fumbled with her keys at apartment 4B. The lock stuck like it always did, and she had to jiggle the handle while balancing Maya and the groceries. For a moment, she almost cried again, not from embarrassment this time, but from exhaustion. Inside their 1-bedroom apartment, Natasha set Maya down and stared at the groceries. 17 items that she couldn't afford, paid for by a stranger in a suit that probably cost more than her rent. She should be grateful. She was grateful. So why did she feel like she'd lost something important back there? Mama, can I have my crackers now? Maya asked, tugging at the grocery bag. It's almost midnight, sweetheart. Crackers are for tomorrow. But I was good at the store. I didn't cry when the beepy thing was mean to you. Natasha knelt down and cupped Maya's face in her hands. Her daughter's eyes held the kind of wisdom that children develop too early when their mothers worked too much and worried too often. You were very good, Natasha whispered. You're always good. As she tucked Maya into their shared bed, the apartment was too small for separate rooms. Natasha's mind kept drifting back to the man at the store. Justine Cole. Something about his name nagged at her, like she should know it from somewhere. The way he'd carried himself, the expensive watch, the black credit card that the cashier had handled like it was made of gold. After Maya fell asleep, Natasha pulled out her phone and did what she'd been resisting for the past hour. She Googled his name. The search results made her stomach drop. Forbes 30 under 30. CEO of Cole Industries. Net worth, $2.3 billion. She scrolled through image after image of him at galas, ribbon cuttings, business conferences. Always in perfect suits, always with that same controlled expression she'd seen tonight. But in one photo, a candid shot from some charity event, she caught something else. He was looking off to the side, and his face held the same hollow loneliness she'd seen in the grocery store. Oh God, she whispered to her empty apartment. What have I gotten myself into? Meanwhile, Justine sat in his penthouse living room, staring at a glass of whiskey he hadn't touched. His normally immaculate space felt different tonight. Too big, too quiet, too empty. He couldn't stop thinking about the way Maya had waved goodbye, or how Natasha's eyes had blazed with fierce pride even as she'd accepted his help. This was a mistake. He'd built his entire life on calculated decisions, strategic moves that advanced his position or protected his interests. What he'd done tonight served no purpose. He'd never see Natasha Williams again. She was from a completely different world, One where people shopped at midnight out of necessity, not convenience. One where a declined card wasn't just embarrassing but devastating. His phone buzzed with a text from his assistant, Margaret. Board meeting moved to 8 a.m. Williams and Associates merger documents need your review. Williams. The coincidence of the name made him pause, though he knew it was ridiculous. Natasha Williams had nothing to do with the multi-million-dollar consulting firm they were acquiring. She was probably a waitress or retail worker, someone just trying to survive in a city that crushed people like her every day. Someone like his mother had been, before she'd married his father. Justine pushed that thought away. His mother was off-limits territory, a chapter in his life he'd sealed shut when he was 15. Thinking about her led nowhere productive, just like thinking about the woman from the grocery store. He picked up the merger documents, determined to focus on something that made sense. Numbers. Projections. Concrete realities. But 30 minutes later, he realized he'd read the same page 3 times without absorbing a word. Get it together, he told himself. It was $47.83. You spend more than that on lunch. The amount wasn't the point, though. The point was the way Natasha had looked at him. Not with the calculated interest he was used to from women who saw dollar signs when they looked at him, but with something rawer. Suspicion, yes, but also recognition? Like she'd seen past the suit and the power to something he'd forgotten existed. His phone rang, jarring him from his thoughts. The caller ID showed his father's name. Justine. Robert Cole's voice was crisp, businesslike, even at 1 a.m. The Tokyo deal fell through. We need to discuss damage control. For the next hour, Justine immersed himself in the familiar rhythm of crisis management, strategic pivots, and calculated risks. This was his world, complex but comprehensible, challenging but controllable. When he finally hung up, the apartment felt normal again. The strange spell of the grocery store had broken, and he was back to being who he'd always been. A man who solved problems with money and power, who kept his emotions locked away where they couldn't interfere with business. But as he headed to bed, he couldn't help glancing toward the window, in the direction of wherever Natasha Williams lived with her daughter. He wondered if Maya had gotten her animal crackers for breakfast. He wondered if Natasha was lying awake, angry at herself for accepting help from a stranger. It doesn't matter, he told himself. You'll never see them again. Somehow, that thought didn't bring the relief he expected. The next morning, Natasha stood in the bathroom mirror of Morrison's diner, trying to make herself presentable for another day of serving coffee and forcing smiles. She'd gotten exactly 3 hours of sleep, her mind churning over everything that had happened. She'd looked up more articles about Justine Cole after Maya fell asleep. Business magazines called him ruthless and brilliant. Society pages showed him with different women, all tall, polished, and expensive-looking. Women who belonged in his world of charity galas and private jets. Women nothing like her. You're being ridiculous, she told her reflection. It was groceries, not a marriage proposal. But something about the way he'd looked at Maya, the gentleness in his voice when he'd spoken to her daughter, that hadn't felt like obligation or pity. It had felt real. And that's exactly why you need to forget about it, she reminded herself. Men like that don't stick around for women like you. Not when things get complicated. She thought about Jeremy, who'd promised her the world, and then disappeared the moment she'd told him she was pregnant. She thought about every other man who'd made her believe she was worth loving, only to prove she wasn't. No, she was done with that. She had Maya to think about now, and Maya needed a mother who was strong, independent, and self-sufficient. Not someone who melted the moment a handsome billionaire showed her a moment of kindness. Her phone buzzed with a text from her babysitter. Maya asking about the nice man from the store. Says he was magic. LOL. Natasha closed her eyes. Even Maya was thinking about him, which meant Natasha had to work even harder to forget. But as she tied her apron and prepared for another day of taking orders and cleaning tables, she couldn't quite shake the memory of how it had felt when Justine Cole had looked at her, really looked at her, and said her name like it mattered. We all build walls to protect ourselves from getting hurt again. What walls have you built around your heart, and what would it take for someone to break them down? Share your thoughts below. Sometimes our biggest barriers are the ones we create ourselves. The emergency room at Mount Sinai was everything Natasha had hoped she'd never have to see again. Fluorescent lights that made everyone look sickly, the smell of disinfectant that couldn't quite mask the underlying scent of fear and pain, and the endless waiting that came with not having good insurance. Maya sat on her lap, clutching a stuffed elephant with one arm in a small cast, trying to be brave while tears rolled down her cheeks. The playground accident had happened so fast. One moment Maya was climbing the monkey bars at daycare, the next she was screaming as her arm bent at an angle that made Natasha's stomach lurch. "Mama, it hurts," Maya whimpered for the 15th time. "I know, baby. The doctor said the medicine should help soon." Natasha smoothed her daughter's hair, fighting back her own tears. The x-rays were done, the cast was on, but they'd been waiting for discharge papers for over an hour. Her shift at Morrison's had ended 3 hours ago, and she was supposed to be at her evening job at the copy center in 30 minutes. She'd already called in sick to the copy center, losing a day's pay she couldn't afford, but there was no choice. Maya came first. Maya always came first. "Mrs. Williams?" A nurse appeared with a clipboard. "The doctor needs to go over Maya's care instructions with you, but he's been pulled into surgery. It might be another hour or two." Natasha's heart sank. Another hour meant missing her community college class, which she'd already missed twice this semester. Another hour meant sitting in this uncomfortable chair, watching her 4-year-old fight pain while trying to pretend everything was okay. "Can't I just take the papers with me?" Natasha asked, though she already knew the answer. "I'm sorry, hospital policy. The doctor has to review everything in person, especially with pediatric cases." As the nurse walked away, Natasha closed her eyes and tried not to calculate how much this day was costing her. The ambulance ride, the emergency room visit, the missed work, the missed class. "Excuse me." The voice made her eyes snap open, and her breath caught. Standing in front of her, looking completely out of place in his expensive suit among the tired families and medical chaos, was Justine Cole. What are you doing here?" Natasha stammered. "My assistant mentioned there was an accident at Little Sprouts daycare." He paused, looking uncertain for the first time since she'd met him. "I wanted to make sure Maya was okay." "How did you even know she went to Little Sprouts?" Justine had the grace to look embarrassed. "I may have made some inquiries after the grocery store. I wanted to make sure you were both all right." "You investigated us?" Natasha's voice rose, causing several other waiting families to look their way. "Not investigated," Justine said quickly, raising his hands in a peaceful gesture. I asked my assistant to check if there were any local families who might need help. Your name came up because of your scholarship application to the nursing program." Natasha stared at him. "How could you possibly know about my scholarship application?" "The Cole Foundation reviews applications for the healthcare education grants." He sat down carefully in the chair next to her, as if approaching a startled animal. "Your essay about wanting to provide better healthcare for underserved communities it stayed with me." Maya, who had been watching this exchange with wide eyes, suddenly perked up. "Magic man, you came to see me." "Hi, Maya," Justine said, his entire demeanor softening. "I heard you had an adventure today." "I falled off the monkey bars," Maya announced, holding up her cast. "But I was brave. The doctor said so. You were very brave. That's a beautiful cast. Can I sign it?" Maya looked to her mother for permission, and despite everything, her confusion, her embarrassment, her growing suspicion that this was more than coincidence, Natasha nodded. Justine pulled out an expensive-looking pen and carefully wrote, "To the bravest girl I know, Justine," on Maya's pink cast. "Are you here to take care of sick people too?" Maya asked. "No, sweetheart. I'm here to take care of you and your mama." "Maya doesn't need taking care of by strangers," Natasha said sharply, but her anger felt forced even to her own ears. She was tired, worried, and completely overwhelmed. The last thing she needed was this man showing up like some knight in shining armor, making everything more complicated. "Mrs. Williams?" The nurse had returned, looking between Natasha and Justine with obvious curiosity. "I have good news. Dr. Rodriguez is available now, but he's asking if you have any questions about follow-up care. Maya will need physical therapy, and there are some specialists we'd recommend." Natasha's stomach dropped again. Physical therapy meant more appointments she couldn't afford, more time off work she couldn't take. "What kind of physical therapy?" Justine asked before Natasha could respond. Are you family? The nurse asked. He's. Natasha struggled for words. What was he? A stranger who'd bought her groceries? A billionaire who was apparently tracking her scholarship applications? He's a friend. The word felt strange on her tongue, but it was the only one that seemed to fit. The therapy is pretty standard for this type of fracture, the nurse continued. 6 to 8 weeks, twice a week. There's a great pediatric center about 20 minutes from here. But I should warn you, most insurance plans don't cover the full cost. That won't be a problem, Justine said quietly. It absolutely will be a problem, Natasha snapped. We'll figure it out ourselves. But even as she said it, she was doing the math in her head. Physical therapy, specialist appointments, time off work for each session. It would be impossible. But accepting more help from Justine felt like crossing a line she couldn't uncross. Mama, Maya said softly, my arm still hurts. Looking at her daughter's face, brave but exhausted, trusting that somehow her mother would make everything better, Natasha felt something break inside her chest. The therapy, she said to the nurse, not looking at Justine. How quickly can we start? Let me get Dr. Rodriguez, the nurse said. He can explain everything. As the nurse walked away, Natasha finally turned to face Justine. Why are you really here? He was quiet for a long moment, watching Maya try to color in a coloring book with her non-dominant hand. I don't know, he admitted. I've never done anything like this before. I couldn't stop thinking about you. About her. And when I heard about the accident, he shook his head. I had to make sure you were okay. This is crazy, Natasha whispered. You don't even know us. I know enough, Justine said. I know you're working 2 jobs and going to school. I know you carry your daughter up 4 flights of stairs every night because your elevator's broken. I know you were going to skip the physical therapy your daughter needs because you can't afford it. You don't know anything about what I can or can't afford. Then tell me I'm wrong. Natasha opened her mouth to argue, but no words came. Because he wasn't wrong, and they both knew it. Dr. Rodriguez appeared, clipboard in hand and a kind smile on his face. Ms. Williams, let's talk about getting this little warrior back to climbing monkey bars. As the doctor began explaining Maya's treatment plan, Natasha felt Justine's presence beside her like a warm wall against a cold wind. She didn't want to lean on him, didn't want to need him. But sitting in that hospital chair, watching her daughter struggle with one good arm while a stranger offered to pay for care she couldn't provide, Natasha realized that sometimes wanting and needing were 2 very different things. And sometimes, the people who scared you most were the ones you needed most to trust. 2 weeks after the hospital, Natasha found herself in the most unlikely place. The passenger seat of Justine's Tesla, driving to Maya's second physical therapy appointment. It had started as a practical arrangement. He'd offered to drive them to avoid the hassle of public transportation with Maya's cast. But somewhere between the first appointment and now, it had become something that felt dangerously close to routine. Maya was chattering in the back seat about her progress with the therapy exercises, completely comfortable with their new normal in the way only children could be. But Natasha remained tense, hyper-aware of the man beside her who seemed to occupy too much space even in his spacious car. You don't have to keep doing this, she said as they pulled into the medical center parking lot. I can take the bus. With a 4-year-old and a cast? That's a 40-minute trip each way. Justine turned off the engine and looked at her. Besides, I like spending time with Maya. She's good company. And what about me? The question slipped out before Natasha could stop it, and she immediately regretted it. I mean, that's not what I meant. I know what you meant, Justine said quietly. And yes, you're good company too. Even when you're trying to convince yourself you don't want to be here. Inside the therapy center, Natasha watched through the window as Maya worked with her therapist, learning to use her arm again. The little girl's determination broke her heart and filled her with pride simultaneously. She reminds me of someone, Justine said, settling into the chair beside her in the waiting area. Who? My mother. The words came out stiff, like they hurt to say. She had that same stubborn streak, that refusal to give up, even when everything was falling apart. Natasha turned to study his profile. In all their interactions, he'd never mentioned family beyond his business empire. She died when I was 15. Cancer. Justine's hands were clasped tightly in his lap. But that's not really what killed her. What killed her was spending 20 years married to a man who saw emotions as weakness and love as a liability. The pain in his voice was so raw that Natasha forgot her own defenses for a moment. Your father, Robert Cole. You've probably seen him in business magazines. Steel magnate builds empire on discipline and determination. Justine's voice turned bitter. What they don't write about is how he built that empire on the bones of everyone who loved him. My mother used to say that loving him was like trying to hug a glacier, cold, immovable, and ultimately destructive. Why are you telling me this? Natasha asked softly. Justine was quiet for a long moment, watching Maya through the window. Because I see the way you look at me sometimes. Like you're waiting for me to prove I'm just like every other man who's hurt you. And maybe, he turned to face her. Maybe I need you to understand why I'm so bad at this. At caring about people. At letting them care about me. You're not bad at it with Maya. Maya's different. Maya doesn't want anything from me except for me to sign her cast and listen to her stories about preschool. Maya doesn't know that men like me are supposed to be kept at arm's length. Men like you. Rich. Powerful. Emotionally unavailable. He said it like he was reading from a resume. Men who learned from their fathers that vulnerability is a business liability. Natasha felt something shift in her chest. This wasn't the confident billionaire from the grocery store, or even the concerned stranger from the hospital. This was someone else entirely, someone who'd been hurt in different ways but just as deeply as she had. My ex left when I told him I was pregnant, she heard herself saying. Jeremy. We'd been together for 2 years, and he talked about marriage, about the future we were going to build. Then I showed him the pregnancy test, and he was gone by morning. Left a note saying he wasn't ready for that kind of responsibility. Maya's father? In biology only. The old anger flared, but it felt different now, cleaner somehow, shared with someone who understood betrayal. I haven't heard from him since. Maya doesn't even know his name. That's his loss. Is it? Or is it just proof that I'm not worth staying for? The words tumbled out before she could stop them, carrying years of hurt and self-doubt. Justine turned in his chair to face her fully. Natasha, look at me. Reluctantly, she met his eyes. A man who would walk away from you and Maya isn't a man at all. He's a coward who was too weak to recognize what he had. You don't know me well enough to say that. I know you work 2 jobs and go to school to build a better life for your daughter. I know you climbed 4 flights of stairs every night with a sleeping child rather than complain about a broken elevator. I know you were willing to put back necessities so Maya could have her animal crackers. And I know you tried to refuse help from a stranger because you're too proud to accept charity. His voice grew softer. I know you're raising the most incredible little girl I've ever met, and you're doing it alone because you're strong enough to do what other people can't. Tears burned behind Natasha's eyes. Stop. Why? Because I can't. I can't do this. I can't let myself believe that you're different. What if I am? What if you're not? She stood up abruptly, needing distance. What if you decide this is too complicated, too messy? What if you get bored of playing savior and move on to the next charity case? Justine stood too, and she could see her pain reflected in his face. What if I don't? I have Maya to think about. She's already attached to you. If you leave, I'm not leaving. You don't know that. People always leave, Justine. They make promises they can't keep, and they leave. Like my mother left me when she died? His voice was raw. Like she chose cancer over staying to protect me from my father? Natasha stared at him, realizing they were both carrying the same wound, abandonment, just wrapped in different circumstances. She didn't choose to leave you, Natasha said quietly. And Jeremy chose to leave you, Justine replied. But I'm not Jeremy, and you're not my mother, dying and leaving me alone with a man who treated love like a business transaction. Through the window, Maya was laughing at something her therapist had said, her cast bright pink against the exercise equipment. She's going to be okay, Natasha said, more to herself than to him. Yes, she is. And so are you. How can you be so sure? Justine moved closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. Because for the first time in my adult life, I'm willing to risk everything to find out what happens if I don't run away. The therapy session was ending, and Maya was waving at them through the window, her smile bright enough to power the whole building. "She's waving at us," Natasha whispered. Like we're a family. Would that be so terrible?" Before Natasha could answer, Maya burst through the door, chattering excitedly about her progress. But as Justine knelt down to hear every word, and Maya threw her good arm around his neck like it was the most natural thing in the world, Natasha felt something she hadn't felt in 4 years. Hope. And that terrified her more than anything. 3 weeks later, Natasha stood in her tiny kitchen, trying to figure out how to cook dinner for 3 people when she usually barely managed to feed 2. Justine was coming over, actually coming to her apartment, and she'd been second-guessing the invitation for 2 days. "Is Mr. Justine really coming to our house?" Maya asked for the 10th time, bouncing on the couch with her cast-free arm. The pink cast had finally come off yesterday, and Maya was celebrating by using both hands to color aggressively. "Yes, baby. He's really coming." It had started innocently enough. Maya had asked if Justine could see her room, and before Natasha knew it, she'd invited him for dinner. Nothing fancy, just spaghetti and the closest thing to normal she could manage in a space where the kitchen, living room, and dining area were essentially the same 6-foot square. When the knock came at exactly 7 o'clock, Natasha wiped her hands on her apron and tried to calm the butterflies that had taken up permanent residence in her stomach. Justine stood in her doorway holding flowers. Not expensive roses or exotic orchids, but a simple bouquet of daisies and sunflowers that looked like they'd come from a corner bodega. Somehow, that made them perfect. "Hi," he said, and she realized he looked nervous too. "Hi yourself. Come in, but fair warning, this isn't exactly what you're used to." Justine stepped into her world and stopped, taking it all in. The worn but clean furniture, Maya's artwork taped to every available wall surface, the smell of garlic and oregano that meant home in a way his penthouse never had. "It's perfect," he said, and meant it. Justine. Look." Maya came running over, holding up both arms. "No more cast. I'm all better. You are. Can you give me a proper hug now?" Maya launched herself at him, and Natasha watched as this billionaire CEO caught her 4-year-old daughter like it was the most natural thing in the world. When had that happened? When had Justine become someone Maya ran to instead of hiding behind her mother's legs? "Mama made sketty," Maya announced proudly. "It's my favorite." "Mine too," Justine said solemnly. "Good choice." Dinner was chaos in the best possible way. Maya insisted on sitting next to Justine, chattering nonstop about preschool, her friend Emma, and a butterfly she'd seen that morning. Justine listened to every word like it was the most important business presentation he'd ever heard. "And then Emma said that purple is better than pink, but I think pink is better than purple, but maybe they're both good. What do you think, Justine?" "I think," Justine said, twirling spaghetti on his fork with more care than he probably gave $1-million deals, "that the best color is whatever makes you happy." "That's a good answer," Maya declared. "You're smart." "Thank you. That's quite a compliment coming from such an intelligent young lady." Natasha felt something warm and dangerous spreading through her chest as she watched them together. This wasn't the formal politeness of an adult humoring a child. This was real affection, genuine connection. After dinner, Maya insisted on showing Justine her room, the curtained-off corner of their bedroom that Natasha had made special with fairy lights and drawings. Justine admired every crayon masterpiece like it belonged in a museum. "This is my bed," Maya said, patting her twin mattress. "And that's Mama's bed. We sleep together 'cause we're a team." "You are quite a team," Justine agreed. "Your mama takes very good care of you." "She does. But she gets sad sometimes. When she thinks I'm sleeping, but I'm not really." Natasha's breath caught. From the doorway, she watched Justine kneel down to Maya's level. "Everyone gets sad sometimes," he said gently. "Even mamas. But that doesn't mean she loves you any less." "I know. I give her extra hugs when she's sad. Want to see my favorite book?" As Maya pulled out a worn copy of Goodnight Moon, Natasha slipped away to finish cleaning the kitchen, her heart full of emotions she couldn't name. 20 minutes later, Justine found her at the sink, scrubbing the same pot for the 3rd time. "She's asleep," he said softly. "I hope it was okay that I read to her. She loves that book. I must have read it 1,000 times. It was my favorite too, when I was little." My mother used to read it to me when my father was working late. He leaned against the counter beside her, which was almost every night. Natasha set the pot down and dried her hands. The apartment felt different with him in it, smaller but somehow more complete. Thank you, she said. For tonight. For all of it. I can't remember the last time someone helped put Maya to bed. Thank you for letting me. He paused. This is the first time I've had dinner in someone's home since I was a teenager. Really? Really. Business dinners, restaurant meetings, catered events, but never this. Never just family dinner around a kitchen table. The word family hung in the air between them, loaded with possibilities and fears. Justine. I know this is complicated. I don't know how to do this. He gestured vaguely around the small space. Normal. Domestic. Whatever this is. You seem to be doing just fine. They were standing close now, close enough that she could see the vulnerability in his eyes, the way he was trying so hard to be someone different than he'd always been. I've been thinking, he said quietly, about what you said at the hospital, about people leaving. Justine. No, let me finish. You're right to be scared. I have no experience with this, with caring about someone so much that it terrifies me. But I know that walking away from you and Maya would be the biggest mistake of my life. How can you know that? Because for the first time in my adult life, I'm not thinking about profit margins or stock prices or what my board would think. I'm thinking about whether Maya's arm is healing properly and if you're getting enough sleep and how to make you both smile. He reached up and touched her face gently. I'm thinking about how this tiny apartment feels more like home than anywhere I've ever lived. Natasha leaned into his touch before she could stop herself. This is crazy. Probably. We barely know each other. I know you bite your lip when you're thinking. I know you sing off-key in the car, and Maya loves it anyway. I know you work yourself to exhaustion, because you think that's what being strong means. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. I know you make me want to be better than I am. You don't need to be better. Yes, I do. For you. For Maya. For myself. When he kissed her, it was soft and tentative, a question rather than a demand. Natasha felt years of walls crumble as she kissed him back, pouring all her hope and fear and desperate longing into that single moment of connection. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his chest. I'm so scared, she whispered. So am I. What if we mess this up? What if we hurt Maya? What if we don't? What if we're exactly what each other needs? From the bedroom came Maya's sleepy voice. Mama? Is Justine still here? He's still here, baby, Natasha called back. Good. I like when he's here. We're happier. Over Maya's innocent wisdom, Natasha and Justine's eyes met, and in that moment, they both realized that the scariest thing wasn't falling in love. The scariest thing was admitting they already had. Natasha first saw the headlines while checking her phone during her break at Morrison's Diner. The notification from Google News made her stomach drop before she even opened it. Billionaire CEO's secret romance. Coal Industries' Justine Cole spotted with single mother. Her hands trembling, she clicked the link. The article was accompanied by photos, grainy but unmistakable images of Justine carrying Maya out of the medical center, of the three of them at a park last weekend, of Justine kissing her goodnight outside her apartment building. Sources close to Coal Industries expressed concern about CEO Justine Cole's relationship with Natasha Williams, a 26-year-old single mother who works multiple minimum wage jobs. Questions arise about Williams's motivations and whether Cole's judgment is compromised by his involvement with someone from such different circumstances. Natasha's vision blurred as she read worse quotes from anonymous sources calling her a gold digger, questioning her fitness as a mother, suggesting she was using her child to manipulate a wealthy man's emotions. Her phone rang. Justine. Natasha, I just saw. Don't. Her voice came out harsh, broken. Just don't. This is garbage journalism. My legal team is already working on. Legal team? She laughed bitterly. Of course you have a legal team. Because this is your world, isn't it? Where everything can be fixed with lawyers and money and the right connections. Natasha, please. Let me come over. We can figure this out together. Together? Did you see what they wrote about Maya? About me? They called me a predator, Justine. They said I was using my 4-year-old daughter to trap a rich man. Nobody who matters believes that. Everybody believes that. My neighbors, Maya's teachers, the parents at her school. Everyone I see every day believes that because it's in print and it makes sense to them. Poor black woman, rich white man, of course she must be after his money. I'm not white, Justine said quietly. You might as well be. You live in a different world than we do. A world where your skin color doesn't matter because your bank account is big enough to protect you from everything. Tears were streaming down her face now. But Maya and I don't have that protection. She could hear voices in the background of his call, his assistant, maybe, or board members. His real world calling him back. I have to go, he said. But Natasha, this doesn't change anything between us. It changes everything. The line went dead. That evening, Natasha sat at her kitchen table with Maya coloring beside her, trying to pretend everything was normal. But Maya was too perceptive, too attuned to her mother's moods. Mama, why are you sad? Did something happen to Justine? No, baby. Justine is fine. Is he coming for dinner tomorrow? He promised to help me with my puzzle. Natasha's heart cracked a little more. I don't think so, sweetheart. Why not? Did we do something wrong? No, Maya. We didn't do anything wrong. But even as she said it, Natasha wondered if that was true. Maybe she had done something wrong by letting herself believe this could work. Maybe she'd been naive to think love could bridge the gap between their worlds. Her phone buzzed with a text from her neighbor. Saw the article. Girl, you better be careful. Then another from a coworker. Is it true? About that rich man. And another from someone she barely knew. Hope you got what you wanted. Each message felt like a small knife, confirming what she'd always known deep down. People would never believe that someone like Justine could love someone like her for who she was, not what she could give him. At Maya's bedtime, her daughter asked the question Natasha had been dreading. When will I see Justine again? I don't know, baby. But he said he wasn't leaving. He promised he wasn't like the other people who leave. Natasha closed her eyes, Maya's innocent words cutting deeper than any headline. Sometimes people have to leave even when they don't want to. But I don't want him to leave. I love him. I know you do. Don't you love him too, Mama? Natasha tucked the covers around her daughter, her own heart breaking. Yes, baby. I do. Then why can't he stay? It was the simplest question in the world, and Natasha didn't have an answer that would make sense to a 4-year-old. How could she explain that love sometimes wasn't enough? That sometimes the world conspired against people who dared to reach across the lines society had drawn? After Maya finally fell asleep, Natasha's phone rang again. This time it was her mother. Natasha Marie Williams, what in the Lord's name are you doing with that man? Hello to you too, Mama. Don't you hello me. I saw the pictures online. People are talking, baby girl. Saying all kinds of things about you and Maya. What people say doesn't matter. It matters when it affects my granddaughter. When her teachers start looking at her different. When the other parents start whispering. You think about that little girl before you go chasing after some rich man's fantasy. It's not a fantasy, Mama. He cares about us. Men like that don't care about women like us, not really. They play around until they get bored or it gets too complicated. Then they go back to their own kind. And you're left picking up the pieces. You don't know him. I know men. And I know this world. That man has a board of directors, shareholders, a reputation to protect. You think he's going to choose you and Maya over all of that? After her mother hung up, Natasha sat in her dark apartment, replaying every moment she'd shared with Justine. Had she been fooling herself? Had she seen love where there was only pity or curiosity, or some wealthy man's midlife crisis? Her phone lit up with another call from Justine, but she let it go to voicemail. Then another. And another. Finally, she turned the phone off. The next morning brought worse news. A second article, this one with more details about her life. Her eviction notice from 3 years ago, her struggles with childcare, even quotes from Jeremy, Maya's father, who had somehow been tracked down and paid for his story about their relationship. She was always looking for someone to take care of her and the kid. I wasn't surprised when I saw she'd landed some billionaire. That's always been her pattern. Natasha vomited when she read that, her entire past twisted into a narrative that painted her as a calculating woman who used men for money. Even Maya's father, who had abandoned them both, was being treated as a credible source. When Justine showed up at her apartment that evening, she didn't let him in. Natasha, please. We need to talk about this. There's nothing to talk about. Yes, there is. I know you're scared, but we can get through this together. Together? She laughed through the door, the sound hollow and broken. Did you see the second article? The one where my ex-boyfriend, who hasn't spoken to Maya or me in 4 years, tells the world I'm a gold digger who uses men. I don't care what he says. Your board cares. Your shareholders care. Your whole world cares, and eventually you will too. That's not true, isn't it? When this starts affecting your stock price, when investors start questioning your judgment, when your carefully built empire starts cracking because of some poor woman and her kid, you'll care then. Natasha opened the door. Please. She pressed her forehead against the wood, tears streaming down her face. I can't do this, Justine. I thought I could, but I can't. Maya deserves better than this. She deserves to grow up without people questioning whether her mother is a good person. You are a good person. The best person I know. Then why does the whole world think otherwise? There was a long silence. Then, quietly, I'm not giving up on us. You should, she whispered. We were fooling ourselves. People like us, we don't get fairy tale endings. We just get hurt. She heard his footsteps retreating down the hallway, and something inside her chest shattered completely. Maya appeared in her pajamas, having heard voices at the door. Was that Justine? Why didn't you let him in? Natasha knelt down and pulled her daughter into her arms, holding her tight as they both cried. Maya because she didn't understand why the man she'd grown to love had suddenly disappeared, and Natasha because she understood all too well. The fairy tale was over. Reality had arrived with the force of a wrecking ball, and there was nothing left but the debris of what they'd almost had. For 3 days, Justine sat in his penthouse office staring at resignation letters he couldn't bring himself to send. One to the board, removing himself as CEO. One to his legal team, firing them for their useless attempts at damage control. One to himself, admitting that maybe everyone was right, maybe he was too naive, too reckless, too selfish to deserve someone like Natasha. His assistant Margaret knocked, and entered without waiting for permission. Something she'd done exactly twice in 5 years of working for him. The board wants to see you, she announced, her usually professional demeanor cracked with something that looked like sympathy. Let me guess. Emergency meeting about my compromised judgment and how it's affecting shareholder confidence. Among other things. She set a stack of newspapers on his desk. It's gotten worse. The headlines made his stomach turn. Gold diggers past revealed, and CEO's costly mistake. And worst of all, is this woman using her child to manipulate a billionaire? There was a new photo, Maya at her preschool, her face circled in red like she was a target. Someone had followed a 4-year-old child to get a story. Get security for them, Justine said immediately. Both of them. Around the clock. Sir, perhaps it would be easier if you just. Get them security, Margaret. Non-negotiable. Alone again, Justine pulled up Natasha's voicemail from 2 nights ago, the one he'd listened to perhaps 50 times. Stop calling. Stop texting. Stop sending flowers. Your world and ours, they don't mix, and trying to force them together only hurts Maya. I won't let her grow up thinking she has to fight the whole world just to be loved. Please, just let us go. But how could he let go of the first real happiness he'd ever known? How could he abandon the woman who'd made him want to be better, and the little girl who'd taught him that love didn't require a business plan? The boardroom felt like a tribunal when he walked in an hour later. 12 faces, all grim, all looking at him like he was a stranger who'd somehow infiltrated their ranks. His father sat at the head of the table, exactly where Justine had known he'd be. Justine. Robert Cole's voice was ice-cold disapproval wrapped in expensive cologne. Sit down. I prefer to stand. This isn't a request. You've embarrassed this company, this family, and yourself. It's time to clean up your mess. Board member Harrison Wells cleared his throat. The stock price has dropped 8% since the story broke. Our investors are concerned about your judgment. My judgment is fine. Is it? His father leaned forward. Because from where I sit, it looks like you've allowed yourself to be manipulated by a woman who saw dollar signs when she looked at you. Don't. Justine's voice carried a warning that made several board members shift uncomfortably. Don't talk about her like that. Like what? Like the opportunist she is? Wake up, son. This woman played you perfectly. The struggling single mother, the adorable child, the chance encounter in a grocery store. How convenient. It wasn't convenient. It was real. Real. Robert Cole stood, his presence commanding the room in the way Justine remembered from childhood, before he'd learned to match that authority. Real is what's happening to our stock price. Real is the fact that our competitors are using this scandal to question our leadership. Real is that you've risked everything your grandfather and I built for some fantasy about playing house with a waitress and her bastard child. The words hung in the air like a physical blow. Around the table, Justine saw uncomfortable faces, but no one spoke up. No one defended what he'd found with Natasha and Maya. Here's what's going to happen, his father continued. You're going to issue a public statement distancing yourself from this woman. You're going to donate some money to a children's charity. Quietly, so it looks like conscience, not guilt. And you're going to get back to the business of running this company like the man I raised you to be. And if I refuse, then you'll learn what real consequences look like. The board has already voted. You have 48 hours to end this relationship publicly, or we'll call for your resignation. Justine looked around the table at faces he'd known for years. Men who'd taught him business, who'd celebrated his successes, who'd shaped him into the leader he'd become. Not one of them met his eyes. I see. He straightened his tie, a gesture so automatic he didn't realize he was doing it. And you all agree with this ultimatum? Uncomfortable murmurs, but no dissent. Of course not. These men had built their fortunes by making hard choices, by sacrificing personal desires for professional advancement. They expected him to do the same. You have 48 hours, his father repeated. Justine nodded once and left the boardroom. In the elevator, he pulled out his phone and did something he hadn't done since he was 15 years old. He called his mother's best friend, the only person who'd really known her. Aunt Marie? It's Justine. Oh honey, I've been watching the news. How are you holding up? I need to ask you something about my mother. About why she stayed with him for so long, even when he treated her like she didn't matter. There was a long pause. She stayed because she thought love was supposed to hurt. Because she thought your father's version of love, cold, controlling, conditional, was the best she deserved. Did she ever regret it? Every day. But especially at the end, when she realized she'd wasted 20 years trying to earn something he was never capable of giving. Marie's voice was gentle but firm. She made me promise to tell you something if you ever called asking about love. What? That real love isn't about what you can afford to lose. It's about what you can't afford to live without. After the call, Justine sat in his car in the parking garage for 2 hours, watching normal people live normal lives. People who went home to families who loved them not for what they provided, but for who they were. He thought about Maya asking if he was magic. About Natasha cooking dinner in her tiny kitchen, humming off-key while she stirred sauce. About the way they'd both looked at him the night he'd read Goodnight Moon. Like he belonged there, like he was home. Then he thought about his father's ultimatum, about the empire he'd spent his adult life building, about the respect and power and security that came with being Justine Cole's CEO. Everything he'd worked for, everything that defined him, everything that made him who the world thought he was, or everything that made him who he actually wanted to be. 48 hours to choose. But sitting there in his Tesla, surrounded by concrete and shadows, Justine realized he'd already made his choice the moment Natasha Williams had gripped his shopping cart with trembling fingers and whispered "Daddy" to a daughter who barely remembered what that word meant. He'd just been too afraid to admit it. Until now. Sometimes love asks us to choose between who we've always been and who we could become. What moment in your life forced you to decide what really mattered? Share your story of choosing love over fear. Your courage might inspire someone else to make that leap. And now came the hardest part, proving to Natasha that some choices, once made, were forever. The press conference was scheduled for 2 p.m. on Friday, exactly 48 hours after his father's ultimatum. The Cole Industries boardroom was packed with reporters, cameras, and board members who thought they were about to witness Justine's public capitulation. They were wrong. Natasha watched from her apartment, Maya curled up beside her on the couch. She'd told herself she wouldn't watch, that seeing Justine publicly distance himself from them would only reopen wounds that were finally starting to scab over. But when the notification popped up on her phone, live, Coal Industries CEO to address romance scandal. She couldn't help herself. Maya had been asking about Justine every day for a week. When is he coming back, Mama? Did we make him sad? I miss him. Each question was a knife in Natasha's chest, but she kept her answers simple. Sometimes grown-ups have to make hard choices, baby. On screen, Justine stepped up to the podium in a crisp navy suit, looking every inch the billionaire CEO the world expected him to be. But Natasha could see the subtle differences. The way he held his shoulders, the set of his jaw, the look in his eyes that she'd come to recognize as his determination face. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice carrying that commanding tone she remembered from their first meeting. I've called this press conference to address recent speculation about my personal life and how it affects Coal Industries. Natasha's heart sank. Here it came, the careful, corporate language that would erase what they'd meant to each other. Over the past 2 weeks, various media outlets have published stories about my relationship with Natasha Williams and her daughter Maya. These stories have contained speculation, innuendo, and in some cases, outright lies designed to sell papers and generate clicks. He paused, his eyes seeming to look directly through the camera at her. So let me be absolutely clear about the truth. Natasha held her breath. I am completely, utterly, and irrevocably in love with Natasha Williams. She is the strongest, most compassionate, most incredible woman I have ever known. She works 2 jobs while going to school, raises her daughter with more grace and wisdom than I've seen from people with far more resources, and she makes me want to be a better man every single day. Gasps rippled through the press room. This was not the script anyone had expected. Maya Williams is a 4-year-old girl who deserves to grow up in a world where people judge her by her character, not by her circumstances. She's taught me more about love, joy, and what really matters than all my years in business school and boardrooms combined. Anyone who suggests that this child or her mother has done anything wrong clearly doesn't know them. Maya looked up at her mother with wide eyes. Mama, is Justine talking about us on TV? Yes, baby, Natasha whispered, tears streaming down her face. He is. On screen, Justine continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. Some of you may wonder how this affects my role at Coal Industries. My board of directors gave me an ultimatum. Publicly distance myself from Natasha and Maya, or face removal as CEO. The press room erupted in murmurs. Robert Cole, visible in the background, looked like he might have a stroke. So let me save them the trouble, Justine said, pulling an envelope from his jacket pocket. Effective immediately, I am resigning as CEO of Coal Industries. The room exploded. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, and somewhere in the chaos, Natasha heard Maya gasp. He picked us, Mama. He picked us. But Justine wasn't finished. As the noise died down, he held up his hand for silence. However, I am not walking away from the company my grandfather built. I'm restructuring it. I've spent the last 48 hours with lawyers, accountants, and advisors, liquidating personal assets to buy out several board members and restructure Coal Industries as a benefit corporation. A company that prioritizes people and social responsibility alongside profit. Robert Cole shot to his feet, but Justine ignored him. The new Coal Industries will focus on affordable housing development, education initiatives, and healthcare accessibility. And yes, I will still run it, but as someone who understands that true success isn't measured in stock prices, but in the lives we improve and the love we choose to nurture. He looked directly into the camera again, and Natasha felt like he was speaking only to her. Natasha, if you're watching this, and I hope you are, I need you to know that everything I said the night we had dinner in your apartment was true. You and Maya make me feel more at home than I've ever felt anywhere. You are my family, the family I choose, the family I'm willing to fight the whole world for. Maya was bouncing on the couch now. Can we see him now, Mama? Can he come home? But Natasha was frozen, watching as the man she'd fallen in love with dismantled his entire life on live television because he'd meant what he said about not leaving. I know I hurt you by letting the world make you feel small, Justine continued. I know you're scared to trust me, scared to believe that this can work. But I'm asking you, both of you, to give me one more chance to prove that love isn't about the world we come from, but the world we choose to build together. The press conference descended into chaos as reporters screamed questions and Robert Cole stormed out, But Justine remained at the podium, calm and certain. That's all I have to say. Thank you. Natasha's phone was already ringing before Justine had left the podium. She answered without looking at the caller ID. Natasha. His voice was breathless, urgent. Please tell me you watched. I watched, she said, her voice thick with tears. And she looked at Maya, who was pressing her face against the window, looking for Justine's car. She thought about the past week of empty dinners and bedtime stories without him, of Maya asking why the man who'd promised not to leave had disappeared. Maya, she called softly. Do you want to see Justine? Yes. Maya shrieked, running to grab her shoes. Is he coming home? Into the phone, Natasha said. We'll be on the roof. Building 4B, apartment 14. The door to the roof is usually unlocked. I'll be right there. 15 minutes later, Natasha stood on the roof of her apartment building, holding Maya's hand as they watched a sleek black car pull up to the curb. Justine emerged, still in his press conference suit, and looked up at them. Justine! Maya yelled, waving with both arms. He waved back, then cupped his hands around his mouth. Can I come up? Yes. Maya shouted back. Natasha just nodded, her heart pounding as she heard his footsteps on the stairs, getting closer with each second. When he appeared on the roof, breathing hard from the climb, Maya launched herself at him like she'd been waiting her whole life for this moment. You came back, she said, wrapping her arms around his neck. You kept your promise. I told you I would, Justine replied, holding her tight. Over Maya's head, his eyes met Natasha's. I told both of you I would. You gave up everything, Natasha said quietly. No, Justine replied, setting Maya down but keeping one hand on her shoulder. I gave up everything that didn't matter to keep everything that did. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the vulnerability in his eyes, the love and hope and terror that matched her own. I know I have to earn your trust back. I know this is scary and complicated, and the world is going to have opinions about us for a long time. But Natasha, he reached up and touched her face, the same gentle gesture from their first kiss in her kitchen. I would rather face the whole world with you than face another day without you. The company will be better than it ever was. Different but better. Like me. Like us. Maya tugged on Justine's sleeve. Are you going to marry Mama? Both adults froze, then started laughing. The kind of laughter that comes from relief, from joy, from the beautiful absurdity of a 4-year-old cutting straight to the heart of things. Well, Natasha asked, raising an eyebrow. Are you? Justine dropped to one knee right there on the roof, with the city spreading out below them and the late afternoon sun painting everything golden. He didn't have a ring. That would come later, something Maya could help pick out. But he had something more important. Natasha Williams, he said, his voice steady and sure. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that fairy tales can come true when two people are brave enough to choose love over fear? Will you be my daddy too? Maya added hopefully, because someone had to handle the practical details. If your mama says yes, nothing would make me happier. Natasha looked at this man who'd just restructured his entire life on live television because he'd meant what he said about not leaving. She looked at her daughter, who was practically vibrating with excitement. She looked at the city where she'd struggled alone for so long, now spread out below them like a promise of new possibilities. Yes, she said, and the word carried all the hope she'd been afraid to feel, all the love she'd been afraid to trust. Yes to all of it. When Justine kissed her, Maya cheered, and somewhere in the distance, car horns honked like the whole city was celebrating with them. Later, much later, after Maya had fallen asleep between them on Natasha's couch and they'd talked through everything, the company restructuring, the new apartment they'd look for together, the wedding they'd plan when they were ready, Natasha would remember this moment as the one where her real life began. Not the life she'd planned or the life she'd thought she deserved, but the life she'd never dared to dream. One where love was stronger than fear, where fairy tales came true for girls from broken elevators and boys from broken homes, and where forever was a promise that could actually be kept. Sometimes, the most beautiful love stories began with a declined card and a stranger's kindness. Sometimes, they ended with a billionaire on one knee and a little girl asking if dreams really could come true. And sometimes, just sometimes, the answer was yes.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed it, You will surely love the next one. It's as interesting and more intriguing than you can ever imagine.